was it that triggered in the mind of that young boy that said, I'm going to do that. I went to Old Castle and I did it. The story is really that from childhood, most children are fascinated by castles, really on the basis of knights in armour and Dungeons and Dragons and moats and sieges and such like. But for me, I'd visited Robertson Castle at the age of 5, and really I was so disappointed because there was such a lot missing. It's sad to see ruins, they're not romantic. So I vowed at that age, even at that age, I was entranced by things, but to restore one, not to appeal to people and say, oh, why is it not restored? Well, do it yourself. And that's what I tried to do. I didn't get very far after 30 years, mind you. Time moves on, you've got to go on with your education, you've got to find a job, you've got to address forming your own household and a family and children. So the dream gets put aside, it's on the back burner, until it just becomes so strong, tugging at me. And I just think, I must do something about it. So I meet a man in East Kilbride who restored a tower house there. And he said, get a map. There's a map published by Collins of every castle in Scotland. And you look at that and go and visit them. You'll soon find one that you want to restore. So in my travels as a salesman, I would go around Scotland and meeting my customers and so on. And as a stationary salesman, you obviously have to dress well, collar and tie, pinstripe suit. But in my travels, I would notice ruined castles or old ruined palaces. I'd see them on the map and think, that's interesting. And I'd park the car and trudge through fields with knee-high grass just to see some ruins and say, wow, this is fantastic. If anybody saw me, they'd think, who is this guy? He's eccentric. This businessman wandering through a field, he must be lost, or he's lost his mind. However, it all adds to the story. You're building up a story of why these buildings were built, who built them, and what is the history behind them. Why did they all fall into ruin? At the age of 40, I discovered Baltersan and thought, that's the one. Brilliant, beautiful building. It needs to be restored. And that became my life mission, really, for the next 30 years. But always travelling in hope. Never having the money for such a thing. But you think, well, if I keep doing a wee bit and a wee bit, and people will gather round and say, wonderful project, yes, here's lots of money, Mr. Brown. I'm afraid that didn't happen. Although I did manage to get through a lot of money. The attitude of Scots to these castles is very interesting. There's a lovely poem, it's a very short poem, it's by a Scots poet, and he says, I had some American friends visit, and they travelled around Scotland, and I asked them, what did you see? They said, we saw 11 castles in 10 days. How American, I thought. So I asked them, which ones did you like the best? The ruined ones. How Scottish, I thought. Scots are hooked on ruined castles with tales of Braveheart and so on. This fantasy situation. They're frightened of buildings that look powerful. You know, ruined buildings in Scotland are like wallpaper. People don't notice them. and they say things like, "Oh, I like it the way it is." They're used to seeing ruined castles. I like it the way it is, but what they don't see is the slow erosion. Now, for people to say today, "I like it the way it is," well, enjoy it, because it won't stay that way for much longer. Here's another example. Stop. Come on. And you just look up and you realise that up there, slowly, the weather just brings these things down. And if you come in here on a stormy, windy day, you wouldn't feel safe if something like that came down on you. Not a safe place to be. Restoration is putting back, restoring something. So you find a piece of carved stone lying on the ground, and you look at it and you look up at the building and say, "Ooh, that came from up there, so we shall restore it." Yeah. That's interesting. And carved stone. I put that there because it is part of something. And this is unusual to be nicely squared, but also R.M. Raymond Musinski is the architect I worked with, but also the family at the Baltersan Mains farm was Muir. The family name was Muir, and often wondered if this was a member of the family. We engraved this away back about 1920, over 100 years ago. But, yeah, gosh, so much. There are three kinds of people in this world: the folk that make things happen, the folk that watch things happening, and the third category is the people that say, "Oh, what happened? I didn't want to be in that last category, and I wasn't comfortable enough to sit in the category that watches things happen. I wanted to make things happen." And I have, to a degree, not to the high degree that I would aspire to, but I've achieved something. Simple as that. My memory of this place is it was buried completely to about this height, completely buried in sand and guano and weeds and so on. And each time I would come here, I would find another stone and say, "Oh, where did that come from?" Well, here's an example. But I think overall in this journey, as I said, I cleared 1,000 tons of stones and rubble. They call it overburden, and 250 years of weeds that grow and die, and so on. I've done it single-handedly, as simple as that. I started off with the archaeologist's recommendation: get your mates in, give them some beer and sandwiches, and they'll help you. It was a sand pit. They just want to muck around and so on. So I thought, no. What about tomorrow, lads? Anybody coming tomorrow? Oh no, I can't manage. I've got to take my mother to the hospital or whatever. So I thought, forget it. I'll do it myself. And I did. I mean, it's done over 5 years, but I did, and that is an achievement in its own. Today, totally overgrown. It's gone back to nature. So in some ways, yes, it's back to when I bought it in 1992. And that's rather sad. But the joy of that work is I'm the one who made the discoveries. I found the coins, I found the broken pots that tell a story, the broken wine bottles that tell a story, the clay pipe bowls that can be dated, and you can even find the manufacturer and so on. So I've had the pleasure of doing all of that. I became my own archaeologist. Crisp packet. Who would want to come in here and have a picnic? God. Discovery is an important word in this journey. I've had the joy of discovery. You might think, what, digging in an old ruined building? Well, to go back to the beginning of this story, when I first acquired Baltersan and first applied for planning consent, there were two things that had to be addressed. One is what suits the planners in terms of a building for health and safety, etc. Does the building work? The other one is Historic Scotland, and they have to have a say in this, because when I bought Baltersan it was category B listed. That's a second grade out of the 40,000 or so listed buildings in Scotland. As soon as I applied for planning consent, it was shot up to category A. Now, for 100 years, nobody bothered with it until I come along and say, oh, don't do it, don't do it. But these people suddenly emerge from the bushes. They've never done anything to save the building, but they'll suddenly, as soon as somebody wants to touch it, oh, you can't do that, can't do that. Oh no, you must do this, can't do that. And this is what happened to me. So I apply for planning and listed building consent, visit the council offices, and two people turn up, looking like refugees from the time team. Oh dear. There's a good Scots phrase about you take an instant scunner to somebody. You know, somebody you've never met, and they won't like you. They just walk in the room. And sure enough, one of these archaeological consultants walks in. Are you the developer? Who's talking to me? No, I'm just a stationery salesman. Developer was a bad word. Developers, no having that. So instantly she took a dislike to me, and it was mutual, as was her companion. He was just as bad. In fact, I actually called them Burke and Hare, because what Burke and Hare did was they killed people to make very interesting cadavers for the doctors. Now, what these two people were saying, and one actually did say to the council, we would be quite happy if it fell down and became a really interesting archaeological site. Now, if that had happened, they would have lost so much, and I've discovered it, and nobody would dare say that. We just want it to fall down. The most memorable thing, I think, bear in mind I've cleared 1,000 tons of stone and sand and weeds and so on. It's one of the smallest things that I found. We have all these wonderful big stones, the wonderful archways in this place, but it was a little piece of plaster with a star scraped into it, a graffito, a single star, 5-pointed star, and it just looked like a child's work. So that one little piece of plaster is almost the biggest treasure for me. Another occasion in clearing stuff, and I'm finished for the day, and I sit down like I'm sitting down now for a rest. It was a clay pipe bowl, just gently down to my feet. Oh, what is this? A lovely thing with lattice work and tobacco leaf on it and so on. But funnily enough, it seems to be the small things. There have been big historical discoveries as well, but these small things, they're personal. You're touching something somebody touched 400 years ago. But I've won, because I've dug up all these artefacts, I've kept them, I've made very neat notes on where I found things, when I found things. In fact, I kept journals that would record how many hours I worked in clearance, recorded the weather on particular days. So if ever I was having the policeman knocking on my door and saying, where were you on the 9th of October 2001, I would just open up my journal and say, oh, I was digging at Baltersan, sir. But what's happened here with these 20 boxes, though, is I've made sure that I've recorded everything I've found, where I found it, when I found it. Okay, so M18 to N20, that was the grid that I created, so that when I found something somewhere, I made a note where I found it. In the case of moulded stones, it means you could look up and say, it fell from up there. And it really is now lying in wait for professional archaeologists to assess and catalogue these pieces that are found, and that will tell us quite a lot about the history of Baltersan. And yeah, lots more glass in here. Now you think, how did you see the glass? And it was surprisingly difficult when you're clearing the soil, because they're covered in soil, so they're almost invisible. But I just kept looking. You know, I wouldn't just shovel everything out. Scrape with a claw hammer, and then you see, there's something, there's something. It's all part of the story, you know, that it's all part of history. When it happens, it's not history, but after 100 years, it becomes history. So we've got wine bottles and it's broken pottery, broken clay pipes. Modern glass. That's the one I'm looking for. Yes, glass. Wine bottle fragments. This is the one. 15th December 2001, neck and other fragments of a wine bottle found about 2 inches above the floor level. So that's back to about 1746, just above floor level, and that was in the kitchen area. Maybe connected with glass fragment found on the 23rd of December in this area. But let's see it, let's see what I've got. Yeah, beauty. That is an 18th century wine bottle. Now, this is one, it might seem like one of the most ordinary things in life, but it's a very important survivor. This was in the kitchen corridor. I found this, and it was beneath the hall fireplace because the vault of the corridor was all removed in times past. And I found lots of coal in different parts of the interior of Baltersan, and the stuff's been gathered. I don't know what my numbers are about here. I don't know what the numbers, forget it. So coal is very interesting in many ways, because back in the 14th century, the monks of Crossrago were burning coal in the fireplace. You always think of history as log fires, but at Dalyalally in Daly, the monks had coal mines, or coal shucks. I think they'd dig into the corner of the side of the hill and extract coal. And I've had this coal analysed. It's not of the highest quality, but my vision was to use this coal to kindle the first fire in a restored Baltersan. It's like the classic line on Dragon's Den where I'm appealing for money and one of the dragons said, "But Jane, it's a ruin." I said, "Yes, but one day it will not be a ruin, but I will."
I'll be ruined. I'll be ruined by this project.
I've discovered all of these and they all tell a story. I've got imagination, and I could imagine the furniture and the drapes at the windows, the painted decoration and so on. So in a way it was a three-dimensional dream to be here, and that would always be a delight, I must admit. But being a curious person, I'm driven by what is underneath all this big heaps, because this wasn't cleared in a day. This was done over 5 years, every now and then when I had time, and I was always curious what is in there. And then revealing a recess over here, and you realise, my goodness, there was a hole in that wall for shooting somebody that you didn't like who's trying to knock in your door. So after about 2 years of digging, because I was digging slowly, like a miner going into creating a tunnel, and gradually got the level down to here, I thought, oh, what is this? What is this? And get it completely cleared, and look in, and I could see a round hole. And I thought, wow, what is that? What is that? But also, curiosity is, you've got two different angles here. It's a very small field of fire if you're using a gun here, but nevertheless two angles. So I thought, well, maybe here's the gun, bang, you've got to swing it round and hand it to somebody to reload. These guns, of course, were very simple, not high technology machine guns they're using, but that then makes me walk outside and see something on the other side of the wall that was there all the time, hiding in plain sight. And these things that you would get just by sitting and looking, contemplating. Don't always be digging, and then you get busy and you get tired and you get exhausted. It is nice just to lie back and visualise what was happening here. All my life since that Robertson visit, every now and then I would be saying to people, oh, I'd love to own a castle. Not for the vanity of it, not to say I am a baron, I'm a laird or whatever, but it was to restore the place, bring life and make it an economic unit. But it becomes to the point of, oh, don't talk to him, he's just going to tell you about his castle. So there is an attitude against saving these buildings, and I've had it towards me. You own a castle, do you? Rich, expletive deleted. I said, no, you're half right. If I didn't own the castle, I would be rich. But no, there is an attitude against, and for some Scots, they're just not interested. We've been gaslighted out of our heritage. Well, being in here, oh my goodness, I think the biggest thrill of working in here or just coming here is I'm looking at 1584 essentially. The level we're now at is the original floor level. Bear in mind when I started here the level was up about this height and I cleared all of this. Is this 1,000 tons? But coming down to this level, you start to appreciate the vault of this cellar. This is a big cellar. This is bigger than the kitchen. And this speaks again of wealth. They had a lot of food to store in this place. And I would come here, do a bit of clearing. When I got tired, I would sit down for maybe 10, 15 minutes before I'd go home. And I'd see the sunlight coming through that window up there. And think, now I know why that window is where it is. And it was to allow the sunlight to shine on the fireplace. The fireplace would have been beautifully carved, and that sun would be coming through because people had their dinner in this place in the afternoon, not in the evening, because it's too dangerous to travel at night time. And the whole idea would be to focus on the great fire and the coat of arms perhaps of the family above there. And that was a simple thing, but simply sitting here, it's like, whizzo, the idea had come, eureka, I've discovered that little secret there. But sometimes I know it sounds daft, but I'd say, John Kennedy, tell me, what made you build this house? And this very spot is memorable because it's where the last barrow load was taken from here when I cleared this place right down to ground level, to the historic floor level. And I have a nice photograph with the sun shining in on the wheelbarrow, like a little angel shining on my friend, the wheelbarrow. You could go on too long at this, and people would then start to look at you as saying, dreamer, fantasist, he'll never get there. And that's not a nice feeling. Because essentially it's in the same, not quite the same state, but almost the same state as when I bought it way back in 1992. Having mentioned finding these little treasures, a bit of plaster, a clay pipe bowl, an old coin, but in fact I actually found a wife through this castle. Amazingly. I was contacted by Susie. She was a journalist with the local newspaper, and she asked to do an article on Baltersan, and because I'd sent her drawings and material for her article, I do calligraphy as a hobby, or have done in the past, calligraphy, and she was entranced with this calligraphy, and that led to a date, and that led to a marriage. When I bought this place, I'm the 100% shareholder, but obviously not well resourced to afford to be able to restore this place. But through marriage, of course, Susie then takes an interest, a deeper interest, and very helpful, very supportive, supportive financially and in other ways for PR work, publicity purposes, journalism and so on. So yes, you could say in fact that greater than the treasure of clay pipe bowls and clay plaster work, finding a wife in a ruined castle, or through a ruined castle, is the better phrase. I was born in Glasgow in 1946. Now that sounds very posh. I should really be saying I was born in Glasgow in 1946. This was in the East End of Glasgow, and it was a very poor area, very poor. When I was born, life expectancy for a male child was 60. Now, my paternal grandfather died at 60, his eldest son died at 60, and my father died at 60. Back then, it was understandable, heavy industry, pollution, smoke, lung cancer, all sorts of industrial problems. But today, the life expectancy in that area, the Carlton in the east end of Glasgow, is still 60. However, you rise above these things, but it's very poor upbringing, really, really very poor. I don't want to tug at heartstrings with this, but imagine a situation of two parents and 8 boys. At that time, I'm only a baby, from being a baby to the age of 5, living in a really horrible Glasgow tenement. Where the back courtyards were full of middens and rats and mice and so on. Very insanitary conditions. The toilet was on the common staircase. Not the actual staircase, but access from the staircase. And that was shared with 2 other households. There were no light bulb in the ceiling. There was no wooden seat on the lavatory pan. Shocking to think back, that was mid-20th century. In 1950, the family was moved to a new housing estate called Pollock in the southwest of Glasgow, and that was luxury because in front of us we had green fields and trees and things that we never saw other than a visit to Glasgow Green. Anyway, by going to Robertson, I suddenly discovered, seaside. I'd never seen the seaside before, never stood on a beach, and a castle. Here's this big medieval castle on a hill, and of course I was taken up to see that, and that filled my head with, wow, history. Never knew anything. The only old buildings I'd seen previously were the dirty black tenements in Glasgow. So that I was entranced by historic buildings, as any child would be, but for me I was sad that it was all broken down. But anyway, as I say, you're only a child, you're only a schoolboy, but the thing that lives with you, the dream, the imagination gets fired up. And when I went to secondary school in Glasgow, it was a school called Baltersan Castle, which was named after the castle right beside it. It's the only medieval castle in Glasgow. Now, while the other children are in the music class learning to sing, I'm gazing out the windows up at the castle and imagining flags flying and ladies in beautiful costumes walking about the gardens and so on. But I keep coming back to this pulling at me of, you must do it. Now, Oscar Wilde said, talent does what it can, genius does what it must. And I felt I must restore a tower house. Didn't make me a genius, mind you. Many wee things and wee discoveries along the way, but there was more. When I then think about the desk-based research, that's where many, many more discoveries were found, and I'll tell you about that. I've transcribed over 400 documents from the Kennedys of Kirkmichael family papers, largely 16th, 17th and 18th century documentation. In there I made a couple of wonderful really discoveries. One was about rhubarb, come back to that. The other was in 1781, a woman called Anne Niclure travelled from Kirkmichael House to Maybole to go for the messages. The shopkeeper wrote down on the bill that was to be presented to Lady Kirkmichael, reference Anne Nick, N-I-C, Clure, not Mac Clure, not M-A-C, son of, because Anne is a female. That proved to me that in 1781, Anne Niclure was a Gaelic speaker. I discovered this in going through all these hundreds of documents, just that wee tiny reference, Anne Nick. Before that, the only other known record was, and it was a family tradition, was Culty Yowen, funnily enough only half a mile from Baltersan, where Margaret McMurray was reckoned to be the last native Gaelic speaker in Carrick in 1761. Rabbie Burns was only 2 years old at the time. So everybody's accepted, Margaret McMurray died, that's it, Gaelic has died. Well, of course, it died when the second last speaker died, because Margaret had nobody to talk to in Gaelic. But anyway, that's accepted, and so 1761 is seen as the end date for Gaelic in Carrick. Well, 20 years later, Anne McClure is using the Gaelic form of her name. It's still lingering. I have the sheer delight of having discovered that, something overlooked by all the top academics in the Celtic studies world. And here's humble me, I'm not a doctor this or a professor that. I found that in a Maybole grocer's bill. Now, the other thing you might associate with grocers is rhubarb. Now, they weren't buying rhubarb in the shop to have with custard. In this occasion, it was Garvin, a doctor, Thomas Garvin, a former provost of Ayr. He's attending David Kennedy of Kirkmichael. The laird is on his deathbed, and Garvin writes out his bill for the various medicines he was giving, and one item said rhubarb. That's funny. So do a bit of research and you find the oracle called Google that rhubarb has been used as a medicine for centuries, been known for a long, long time. But the Thomas Garvin story expands. He had gone to Russia as a young doctor. He got a job in the train of the Tsar of Russia and went to St. Petersburg, where there were already many, many Scots in the royal household, the Tsar's household. And while there, the Emperor of China wrote to the Tsar of Russia saying, "Can you recommend a good doctor?" He said in Chinese, of course. And recommend a good doctor. And the Tsar of Russia says in Chinese, perhaps, or maybe he spoke his own language in Russian. But anyway, he said, "Look, I'll send this man, a Scotsman called Thomas Garvin." And Garvin travelled for months to get to China, treats the Chinese emperor, is given loads of gifts and money, comes back home to Ayrshire, and buys a wee estate near Kilmarnock, Cumsiskin, and settles down. Unbelievable. He's been painted in his Chinese garb and so on, so we know that. Now, when I went into the Royal Institute of Physicians in Edinburgh, they sort of grabbed me and dragged me in and said, "This is interesting," of course, because it's the earliest record in Scotland, written record, of rhubarb being prescribed as medicine. And that happened at Kirkmichael in Ayrshire. That's the sort of joy I get out of the historic research. Not only have I researched or transcribed verbatim over 400 documents, I've also bought over 400 documents on eBay for Ayrshire history, and some of it is about Baltersan. So I've got the absolute joy now in my retirement, hopefully I'll manage to get through a few years more, to transcribe those documents, and who knows what discoveries are waiting to be there. I've discovered when the famous Lancelot Kennedy died. Lancelot was very famous because he was accompanied Sir Thomas Kennedy in 1601 when Sir Thomas was murdered by a gang in part of the Kennedy of Castles and Kennedy of Burgundy feud. Small things, okay, they're wee toty things, but wee toty things, mony a mickle makes a muckle. They build up. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. John Chalmers hasn't paid his debt. Bad boy. He is outlawed. He's put to the horn. But it is that joy of discovery that you found something and you just can't wait to go out and tell people. But unfortunately, the general population, if I had to run out and say, "Hey, did you know about rhubarb? I found it when it was first prescribed." They'll say, "Oh, that's a shame, son." It is met with a shrug, quite rightly. Smash in that door, and you were also being viewed from keek holes in the sides of these turrets and so on. It would be nice if people recognise what I've done. And it is nice to see one's name appearing. I've just received a book from an American academic in Washington University. Mickey Brock has written about Covenanters and plague in 17th century Ayr. And so I open up the book and there in the acknowledgements, there's my name, because I helped her get research material.
This is the book I'm mentioning. Plagues of the Heart. This Mickey Brock is a professor from Washington University, not Washington DC, it's another university, and she's researched witchcraft and such like, and the plagues of Ayr, and the troubles with the Covenanters and so on, in times past. And it's a very nice book. This is an old etching of Ayr. That's the old brig is just down there, and this is St John's Tower. It's just here. The tower is still surviving. The buildings have gone, but the tower was in the middle of the fort, the Cromwellian fort, which could be supplied by the sea. That's why it was built there. And that is the old brig. And Loudon Hall is just about here. Now, we look at that. There we are. To James. Best tour guide and historian. Thanks for everything, Mickey.
So I'm already having that sort of impact, and it's nice. You're not buying it, you're earning it, which is a nice thing. Now, reaching the end of my journey with Baltersan is in fact not reaching the end, and herein lies a dilemma, a serious dilemma. I've sold my baby. This is sort of a child I raised for 32 years, and I sold this wee thing. It's a big thing in some ways, but I've sold something that I've been passionately attached to for 32 years. That's a big section of my life. It's more than a third of my life, but at my present age of 78, I'm not immortal. Well, nobody's immortal, but I'm closer to mortality than a lot of people. And it's now fashionable, and that's the wrong word to use actually, but I have prostate cancer. So has the King. So has Sir Chris Hoy. But nevertheless, this brought it home to me that at the age of 78, my health is not perfect, I'm not immortal, so I have to do something, and that brought about the selling of Baltersan. Because I've still got in my head the vision. And the way I'm going to do it for the future is I'm going to have a YouTube channel, I'm certain of that, and I'll be able to project my vision of Baltersan and my story. And one of my past hobbies was painting and drawing, and I'll get back to that, and I'll do drawings of Baltersan, interiors and exteriors. And I'll get the pleasure of putting down in 2 dimensions this vision inside my head that's getting multiple dimensions. But I think looking to the future and looking backward, being in the future and looking backwards long after I've gone, people will write down, I would hope, James Brown saved Baltersan. And I think that'd be good. Obviously I'm not around to see it, but perhaps my daughters and my grandson and granddaughter and great-granddaughter, perhaps they'll look upon it and say, I wish I'd realised that about great-granddad. I think that'd be a nice legacy.